Hi everyone, my name is Johan Ehn and I'm the author of this book, Not Dead Yet, where we get to meet my main character, 84-year-old Elis, who wakes up at the cardiac intensive care unit after a somewhat strained afternoon celebrating Christmas Eve with his family. He then realizes he's running out of time if he wants to find the answers to all the questions that have been haunting him throughout his life. Lying there in his high-tech hospital bed, he starts to cross over into dreamlike states of mind. But they're not regular dreams. There's something so much more. But let me take you back to that Christmas Eve a few years ago. There's not a pear tree in sight. And wherever the partridges may be, it's definitely not here. The fire isn't crackling invitingly either, like when the flames caressed the logs he'd chopped himself, and that he and father had carried in from the perfect stacks in the woodshed. No smell of rice porridge made with milk from their own cows. No carols coming from the sitting room where Uncle Anders would play the leaky old pump organ and sing. The windows aren't wreathed in a lacework of frost, and there are no rich-smelling gingerbread hearts hanging in them from red velvet ribbons, each pipe with a family member's name in colourful curlicue frosting. Everyone's always ends up having traditional Christmas food too many times anyway, so we've decided to go for shellfish on Christmas Eve. It's a bit fancy, and everything looked so amazing when I was at the market last week. I hope no one misses those dried-up sausages. But he does. And he misses the herring. He misses the ham, the meatballs, the potatoes, the beetroot salad, the red cabbage, and all the other dishes a person ought to be able to expect to be served on Christmas. It's so like Åsa to ruin the one thing he'd been looking forward to about this whole to-do, just so she can make sure everyone knows that she and Jan are flush enough to buy lobsters from the posh fishmonger on Östermalm. Elis is celebrating Christmas with his son Jan and his wife Åsa in their terraced house in Mörby, north of Stockholm. Though if Åsa had heard him call it that, she would have corrected him and said it's actually called a townhouse. And it's really practically in Danderyd. Ridiculous. The townhouse is tastefully decorated. You have to give that much to Åsa. She has an eye for those kind of things. Old farmhouse furniture they've purchased at various auctions, mixed with more modern Scandinavian design. Chairs and a kitchen table made of teak, if he had to guess. An enormous black leather sofa along the back wall of the living room, in which several of his other relatives are slumped. What a group. His sister Martha has taken a seat at one end. It's hard to accept that she's 86 now, 2 years older than him. You'd never think they were siblings. Martha is round, and not just because she's overweight. Even without the extra pounds, her pale pink face has always been circular in shape. His is more oblong. Her nose is a little round button. His is long and hooked. Martha has dressed up for the occasion in a red blouse and skirt. Both look a couple of sizes too small and strain around her chest and belly, which, coupled with her now snow-white curly hair, makes her look like a poorly dressed Mother Christmas. Sitting next to Martha is one of Elis's grandchildren, Caroline, and her bland husband, Hannu. Both are lawyers and work for the same insurance company, and they live somewhere in Mörby now too. Caroline is only a few years into her 30s, but already looks frumpy in her beige suit and with her hair cut in a short bob. Her husband Hannu has fine hair of an indeterminate shade of blonde. His brown suit is probably expensive, but it can't hide his awful posture. He looks more like a lost child than a grown man, sitting there wedged between his wife and his mother-in-law. Elis's daughter-in-law, Åsa. Åsa could have been a bit of a looker, if it weren't for her perpetual air of pompousness. Elis has always felt she positively radiates condescension. as though she is convinced that she knows better than everyone else. When she was younger, her brown hair reached her waist, but now she has had it cut short in a more manageable style, dyed several shades of grey. It makes him think of a badger or a skunk. His son Johan is running about serving everyone, making sure no one of their guests wants for drinks or snacks. He has really gone all in this year. Red knit jumper with a white reindeer on it, and on his head a Father Christmas hat. Elis regrets dressing up. His shirt collar is making him itchy, and his tie is too tight. He pulls on the knot to loosen it a fraction. He could really take his jacket off, but he doesn't want to put his pit stains on display for everyone to see. He has claimed the Chesterfield armchair facing the sofa, next to the stamp-sized patio. He feels the chair suits his standing as the patriarch of the group. It's reminiscent of a throne, with its wide, rounded arms and aged oxblood leather upholstery. The only thing he doesn't like about it is that it's so bloody deep. Once seated, it's a struggle to get back up. He takes a sip of the whiskey Johan has supplied. It's a slightly smoky single malt from the wind-swept Isle of Islay, and one of the most expensive in Johan's collection, as he has just been informed. Johan had pronounced the name of the island with an exaggerated Scottish accent. Who cares where the booze is from? It's not like Elis is planning to make conversation with it. All he wants is to numb his brain cells and zone out for a little while. It is, in fact, a damn good whiskey, but his son's pretentious attitude makes him so tired sometimes. He remembers a New Year's Eve a few years ago. At midnight, Johan had asked them to all gather around, and then he had climbed up on a chair and sabred some fancy bottle of champagne. He had looked so incredibly bloody daft with that ridiculous sabre in his hand. And then he'd been miffed when people didn't want to drink the bubbly because they were sure there was glass in it, since he'd cut the entire neck of the bottle off. Elis looks over at his son, who is rocking back and forth in one of those silly ergonomic chairs with no backrest, swirling a glass of cognac. "This is a Courvoisier," he hears him explain to Martha, who seems more interested in the bowl of crisps sitting in front of her. "It's extra vieille, which is to say over 20 years old. They sell it for over 5,000 kroner a bottle." The bookshelf behind Johan covers almost the entire wall. At least 100 bottles, most of them whiskey, can be made out through the opaque glass doors that run like a divider along the middle of the shelf. Elis studies his son's face. They have the same nose, thin with a small bump halfway down. Their lips are fairly similar too, he supposes, full, with a clearly defined Cupid's bow. But aside from some shared physical traits, they have almost nothing in common. He has often found Johan hard to understand, feels he puts on airs and tries to be someone he's not. And Elis read in the paper the other day that the company Johan works for is in trouble again. They manage foreign investments in developing countries, and it has come to light that one of the managers has been embezzling foreign aid money, using it to buy private properties. Last time it was something about aiding and abetting corruption in South Africa. He wouldn't half mind telling Johan what he thinks about his employers, but he knows from experience that tends to lead to unpleasantness. Their values are simply too different. "That's my lollipop. I was saving it." A child's shrill voice pierces his ears like the sound of a breaking train. "No, I want it," another child screams back. "Could you keep it down?" he grunts, glaring at the 3 children, aged between 3 and 5, who are running about like a pack of hyenas on the savannah. Empty bags of sweets are scattered on the floor around them, like savage prey. Nothing left but the hides. The chocolate goop in the corners of their mouths and their blue tongues is proof the pack has killed and eaten. The hyenas pay him absolutely no heed, just carry on their loud argument. I had it first." Sonja would have calmed them down instantly. She'd had a way with children, an ability to make them listen to her, without even raising her voice. But Sonja never got to meet their great-grandchildren. Come May, it will be 8 years since his wife passed away. "My lollipop, my lollipop," one of the little beasts, Caroline and Hannah's eldest, howls. Why aren't their parents doing something? "Give it!" He can't take it anymore. "Bloody hell, will you keep it down?" he roars. "You sweared," one of them exclaims and points at him with a sticky little paw. "Yes, he most certainly did," his big sister Martha wheezes from the corner of the sofa, clapping a hand to her mouth in feigned shock. "And you know what? He has always been foul-mouthed. When we were children, our mother had to wash his mouth out." "Really?" A flushed little boy looks up and asks. "Yes, with soap," Martha replies. "Ew!" "Indeed. And he was spitting and hissing for the rest of the day, let me tell you." She chuckles so merrily her double chin jiggles. But that's not true. First of all, it was their younger brother Jimmy who used to swear like a sailor, not him. On the contrary, he'd made a conscious effort to always sound as proper as possible, precisely to set himself apart from the rest of the family, a group of people he'd never felt were really his family. Second off, he hadn't even been living in Stockholm at the time. And third, she hadn't used soap. His sister Jean, 4 years older than him, had later told him their mum hadn't been able to find any soap, so she'd poured venom in his mouth instead. What a wonderful example of good parenting, using a dangerous cleaning product to discipline your child. The good old days indeed. Both Jean and Jimmy are gone now. Why didn't Mum just leave me where I was? As so often before, he wonders what life would have been like if he'd been allowed to stay with his foster family in Dalarna. What if? But then he probably wouldn't have met Sonja. 1954, after a warm summer evening at Skansen, they'd become a couple, and 3 years later they were married. They only had one child. Sonja had wanted more. She felt Jan should have had siblings, that their family was incomplete with just one child. He glances down at the screeching hyenas and feels confirmed in his conviction that one had been enough. That being said, in recent years he has wondered whether he'd resisted because he'd been afraid of passing on undesirable behaviours from his own dad. But be that as it may, in the end, it hadn't been up to him and Sonja anyway. He gazes out at the room, wondering why he agreed to come to the spectacle. He could have been home right now, in his own flat in Hammarbyhöjden, enjoying the peace and quiet, watching an old film, something with Monica Vitti, perhaps. Red Desert by Antonioni is one of his favourites. Or he could have put on his headphones and taken a ride with John Coltrane on his blue train. The only people he'd been looking forward to seeing were his other grandchild, Henrik, and his partner, Miguel, but they had just stopped by briefly to drop off their son, the flushed specimen who wanted to know about the soap, so he could play with his cousins while they attended Christmas Mass in the Catholic Church. Not everything was better in the olden days, but Elis counts the memories of his childhood Christmases up in Thomasbo in Bjursås parish in Dalarna as some of the loveliest knocking about inside his bald head. He particularly recalls one winter, when father had taken him up to the family farm 2 days before Christmas. They'd lit fires in every room of the large log house, shoveled at least 3 feet of fluffy white snow from both the yard and the porch, brought a tree in from the woods and laid down an inviting rug of spruce branches at the bottom of the front steps. They had worked hard all day, stopping only once to wolf down their julpärykakku, soft wraps made of potato and rye flour with a slice of ham inside. Later that afternoon, they'd put the horse before the sled again and gone back down the mountain to pick up Mother, Nana Helmi, the siblings, their aunt and uncle, and all the other relatives who were coming to celebrate the birth of Christ with them and staying until Boxing Day. How different his two worlds were, his Stockholm world and his Dalarna world, and rarely the two met. He looks out at the living room, the members of his Stockholm world all engaged in lively conversation. He feels no need to participate, preferring instead to retreat into his other world. By this point, Mother and Nana Helmi would have been cooking for over a week. There had been no obscene largesse, but everything had been delicious and made the traditional way. The brawn and the sausages, the lutfisk, and the ham studded with cloves, the ham stock that would be turned into dopp i grytan, with soft wraps, of course, not that sickeningly sweet wort bread. And then, when they were all packed into the sled under sheepskin rugs, arms full of crates of food and drink, a big sack of gifts at their feet, and the lanterns cast their warm light over the horses' broad bottoms, he'd been happy. That feeling of anticipation of something he already knew would be wonderful, along with the knowledge that he truly belonged there, wedged in between people he felt completely safe with. That feeling has for him, then and ever after, been synonymous with that word, happiness. Thank you.